Hey everyone, welcome to the show. It's amazing how a family's past can really hang around, like a ghost story almost. Like echoes of, well, old love affairs, or losses, scandals even. And they kind of ripple through the years, right? Like changing the lives of, well, everyone who comes after. And today we're diving into, well, a family like that, the House of Byron.
Yeah, exactly. We're taking a deep dive into Emily Brand's book, The Fall of the House of Byron. It's kind of a sweeping family history, right? It's got everything: passion, tragedy, ambition, and well, a little bit of craziness too, and all that's happening around this incredible place, Newstead Abbey.
It's a wild ride, that's for sure. And there were a few things that really stood out to me when I was reading Brand's book. First, the way she shows how the Byrons, well, they're both shaped by the times they lived in, but they also kind of push back against those times, too. It's like you can feel history unfolding right alongside their own stories.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing to see how like social rules and big historical events they pushed and pulled on the Byrons, and sometimes the Byrons they kind of pushed back, right?
Yeah.
They went their own way. It's a really cool way to look at history.
Totally. And the family itself, the Byrons, I mean, talk about a complicated family tree. It's like a spider web, honestly. But
Right.
once you start to untangle it, you see how all these relationships, or sometimes the lack of relationships, really shaped their destinies, especially when you consider, well, all the major historical events that were happening around them.
It's like their personal lives are woven right into the bigger historical picture,
Mm.
you know. And Brand does a fantastic job of showing how wars and social changes, they all had a huge impact on the family. And the family, well, they had an impact on history too. It makes you think about how, well, every family's story is kind of a reflection of the times they live in, right?
Right. And then there are all the little details, the stories, the anecdotes that Brand dug up. It's like, you start to see these historical figures as real people. They're not just names in a book anymore. They have personalities, they have quirks, they have, those little things that make them relatable, even though they were, living these totally different lives from ours.
Yeah, those little details are what really bring history to life, right? They give you this glimpse into, well, what made these people tick? What motivated them? It's what makes The Fall of the House of Byron more than just a history book. It's like, well, you're right there with them.
I have to say, I loved the book. I give The Fall of the House of Byron a solid 4 out of 5 stars.
It deserves it. And in this deep dive, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Unpack some of the most interesting things about the Byrons. So we want to give you, well, like a shortcut to understanding their crazy story.
Let's dive in then. We start with young George, the future poet, arriving at Newstead Abbey. It's 1798, and he's with his mom, Catherine, and his nursemaid. Catherine's had a rough marriage. She's a Scottish heiress, and you can tell she's relieved her son's inherited this grand estate. What struck you about this first scene?
Well, right away, you notice like this weight of history surrounding Newstead. Brand makes it clear, even before George gets there, that the Abbey, it's seen it all. You know, Henry II founding it as a priory. He was trying to make up for killing Thomas Becket. Then it got ransacked when Henry VIII decided to get rid of the monasteries. And then the Civil Wars. Wow. The place is like soaked in history.
Totally. And even young George, even with his limp, he's like drawn to this history. He wants to explore everything. And his lawyer, Hanson, calls him a fine, sharp boy, but maybe a little spoiled. It seems like Newstead with its dark past, it's already firing up his imagination. What do you think?
Totally agree. And Hanson, he kind of feeds this curiosity. He shows in the Grand Hall, and Brand, well, she describes it so vividly. Imagine, imagine this huge medieval room. It was the monk's dining room, and now it's got the Byron family crest on display, this mermaid with a mirror, chestnut horses on either side, and the motto is kind of ironic, Creed Byron, trust in Byron.
Mm.
Makes you wonder about, well, what kind of stories are behind that motto?
Oh, it really sets the scene, doesn't it? But Brand also mentions that the place is kind of run down, all the fancy statues and paintings are gone, and there's this smell of hay, like stuffed into the walls. It's grand, but well, it's definitely seen better days. What do you make of that contrast?
Right, that contrast, the faded glory and the decay, kind of it runs through the whole story of the Byrons. It's not just the building, you know.
Mm.
It's like a mirror of their own ups and downs, their own fall, like the book's title says. It makes you think what really matters in a family's legacy. Is it the money and stuff, or is it something more lasting?
They keep exploring, going through these old bedrooms and dressing rooms, which are, well, even worse. But then there's this detail. Names and birthdays of George's grandfather's generation, etched on a window pane with a diamond. These little personal touches, amidst all the decay, they really get to you.
Right. They bring the story down to earth, make it human. And then there's this bedroom that's still kind of beautiful, with a ceiling painting showing all the marriages of George's great-grandfather. But his third wife, George's own great-grandmother, she's not there in the painting. Like, maybe those marriages weren't all sunshine and roses. What do you think about that?
And Brand points out, that those earlier brides, they didn't have happy endings. It's almost like a hint, right? Like a foreshadowing of all the trouble with marriage that the Byrons would face later on. Like maybe there were these patterns, these expectations around marriage that were kind of baked into the family.
The Abbey itself, it's like a silent witness to all the Byron drama, right?
Yeah.
Brand talks about the first owner, this boisterous theatrical troupe, like I call it the Great Beard, another one with a broken heart. The family became peers, with the seat in the House of Lords and all that, through fighting in battles and, well, if you believe Samuel Pepys, maybe to some less respectable ways in Charles II's court. Talk about colorful.
What a story. And the Byron men, they already had this reputation, right? Good at fighting and, well, let's just say good with the ladies, too. It's like some traits, good or bad, they get passed down through generations. Does Brand talk about why this might happen?
Yeah, she touches on family legacies. It's like, well, you said it in the intro. That's a big theme here. These ways of behaving, these expectations, they get passed down, whether you realize it or not. And they shape everyone who comes after. It makes you think, how much do family expect? Well, how much do they help us, but how much do they hold us back?
And then Brand takes us back in time to give us the bigger picture, right? We meet William, the fourth Lord Byron, George's great uncle. He gets Newstead in the early 1700s, a pretty uncertain time. Britain was a new country, the Hanoverians were on the throne, and there were still Jacobites stirring up trouble. They wanted to put the Stuarts back in power. So politically, things were pretty shaky.
Yeah, this is where the historical backdrop really comes into play. You can see the world William and his siblings were born into, a world that was still figuring things out. Politically, there was a lot of back and forth, and new ideas were like challenging old beliefs. Brand even mentions this controversial book, Moll Flanders, that everyone was talking about. It shows you how much things were changing, intellectually and socially.
And the Byron kids, William and his siblings, Isabella, John, Richard, Charles, they had a pretty good childhood, although not without its issues. We hear about how all the servants would get together for dances, which gives you this intimate look at everyday life at the Abbey. What do those details tell you?
They're like little windows into their world.
Right.
The formal visits, hanging out with other families like the Savills and the Chaworths. Those names pop up again later, by the way. And Brand mixes these everyday scenes with what was happening in the world, political stuff, but also like this weird national obsession with a woman who was supposedly giving birth to rabbits.
It's funny how, well, even back then, people loved a good, strange story.
It's like human nature never really changes, does it? But their sheltered life in Nottinghamshire, it didn't last. Their dad had to go to London when the old king died. How did that move affect the family?
Well, moving to Westminster, it was like, boom, right into the heart of this busy city. Total opposite of quiet Sherwood Forest. They had this fancy place on Great Marlborough Street, decked out in the latest style. They were hanging out with lords and ladies, military types, even though the country was in mourning for the king. It was a huge change.
Culture shock, for sure. And not far away, you had Tyburn Road, where they had public executions. Pretty grim reminder of the times. But the Byrons, they already had connections in the city, right? Oh, yeah, they were in this social circle with, well, some respectable folks and some not-so-respectable folks. The Bentings and Egertons, they were close, but they also hung out with gamblers and guys who like cockfighting. Their dad owed some of them money, actually. Their mom's family was huge, with all these Berkeley aunts and uncles visiting. It shows you how complicated aristocratic life was.
And Brand gives us these little sketches of their personalities, like their grandfather, Lord Berkeley. Apparently, he wasn't too happy about raising daughters and was always complaining about how his daughter Frances was, well, getting older and not looking as good. And their aunt, Elizabeth Temple, she wore a ring with their hair intertwined.
These little things, they make these historical figures come to life, don't they?
They totally do. And then along comes another Byron sibling, George, born in 1730. The fact that King George II himself was his godfather, that shows you how the family was trying to climb the social ladder, They wanted to be in good with the king, and it looks like they succeeded. It shows you how important royal connections were back then. They were definitely moving up in the world. But then Brand turns our attention to the older kids and how they were raised. Isabella, being a girl, well, her life was going to be very different from her brothers. What were the biggest differences in how they were raised?
For Isabella, it was all about marriage. Her parents were already thinking about who she might marry, and because they weren't exactly rolling in money, it was important for Isabella to be charming and well-mannered. Brand talks about all the strict rules girls had to follow back then. Be modest, don't laugh too loud, sit up straight, and never ever disagree with a man. That sounds pretty suffocating.
It does, doesn't it? Even being smart, well, you couldn't really show it off. Like one etiquette book said, silence always becomes a young lady. Talk about limited options.
Right. Isabella's social education started when she was like 8 years old. She had to learn how to behave around good company so she'd have good manners. She watched visitors, practiced how to walk and stand, learned to dance, draw, sing, speak different languages, all these things to, well, to attract a good husband.
And her brothers, they learned some of that stuff too, but their options were way more open. They did physical activities, they read their dad's books about history and politics, and they were expected to have careers in the military, politics, or the church. Being born aristocratic, it gave them this sense of entitlement that Isabella just didn't have.
Their education was all about preparing them for public life, while Isabella was being prepared for, well, being a wife and running a household. William, the oldest, he would inherit everything, the title, the estates, the whole shebang. But his younger brothers, they still had options, within their social class. It just shows you how different things were for men and women and how much depended on being the firstborn son.
But then tragedy hit the family. In the spring of 1731, this fever broke out. Little John and Charles, they got sick. And even though the doctors tried everything, little Charles, he died just a few weeks after his 5th birthday. It's a reminder of how common it was for kids to die back then, even rich kids.
It must have been devastating for the family. It's like a reminder that, well, no matter how rich or powerful you are, life can be really fragile. I'm sure it had a huge impact on the other kids and their parents, probably changed the whole family dynamic.
After that, William and John were sent off to Westminster School. Public school was supposed to, build character and help them make connections with other upper-class boys. But it wasn't always a good thing, was it? What were some of the things parents worried about when they sent their sons away to school?
Oh, yeah, there were definitely downsides. Parents worried about, well, the schools being rough. They worried their sons would pick up bad habits or get sick. Brand quotes this letter from a boy at Westminster. He's begging to go home, complaining about being covered in ink and getting tossed in a blanket like a hazing ritual. Even the poet William Cowper, he went to Westminster later on, around the same time as their younger brother George. He was pretty cynical about why parents sent their kids to these schools. He thought it was more about status than, actually getting a good education.
The Byrons, though, maybe they tried to find a middle ground. They chose Westminster, which was close to their house in London. Maybe the boys could even go home after school sometimes. So in 1732, 9-year-old William and 8-year-old John, they're thrown into this crazy school environment. What do you think this choice tells us about the family's priorities?
It's interesting. John had bounced back from that fever that killed his little brother. He was tough, and that seems to be a Byron trait, would you say? Choosing Westminster being so close, maybe it shows they wanted the boys to get that public school experience, but still have, some kind of parental guidance and, home comforts.
While the boys were off at school, their mom, Frances, she got involved in this pretty progressive charity. What was it all about?
She became one of the first supporters of the Foundling Hospital. It was this brand new idea, a place to care for babies who were abandoned or, whose families were too poor to take care of them. It was controversial back then. Some people thought it would encourage people to have kids they couldn't afford. It shows how ideas about poverty and charity were changing in the 18th century.
Yeah, Frances sounds like a kind woman, but Brand also suggests that maybe she was trying to be part of a trendy cause or just, find something to do to take her mind off things. Her marriage wasn't going so well, and her own father supposedly didn't even recognize her when he saw her in town. What does that tell us about the pressures on women back then?
It's kind of sad, right? As women got older, especially in those fancy circles, they were seen as less and less important. And Frances had just lost her brother, Captain William Berkeley. He died at sea, which reminds you of how dangerous life was back then, even if you weren't fighting a war. Ironically, maybe her nephews would find that life appealing later on.
As their dad, William, the 4th Lord Byron, got sicker and sicker, the siblings, their lives went in different directions. Isabella, she focused on her studies and her faith. She found comfort in books and religion. Her younger brother Richard, after 3 years at Westminster, he came back home. Maybe public school wasn't for him? What does this tell us about the different personalities in the family?
It shows that even in the same family, People can be really different. Richard seemed to like, well, quieter things. He wasn't as outgoing and adventurous as some of his siblings. It's a good reminder that everyone's different, even within a family.
In the summer of 1736, London was, well, it was a mess. There was political tension, people were talking about sea monsters, and Lord Byron was getting worse. What happened in his final days?
His health just kept declining. The doctors did what they could, the servants took care of him, but nothing worked. After being sick for a long time, William, the fourth Lord Byron, he died at Newstead in August 1736. Frances was a widow at 33. His death changed everything for the family and for Newstead Abbey.
His obituary in the London Evening Post was a mess, too. And they got his daughter's name wrong, and they even said his son Charles was still alive, even though he had died years earlier. It seems like, well, people didn't really care that he was gone. His main legacy was Newstead Abbey. What does that tell us about how important he was?
I guess it shows that fame doesn't always last. His biggest impact seems to have been on his family,
Huh?
and now they had to figure out how to live without him. Makes you think about what really makes a lasting legacy.
His son, William, the fifth Lord Byron, he was at sea when his dad died. He didn't come back to England until early 1737. His mom, Frances, she immediately started planning for the future. What were her top priorities?
Frances was a practical woman. She looked at all their money, paid off debts, and even considered renting out Newstead. But that worried the neighbors. They didn't want just anyone moving in, especially not someone who might support the Jacobites. It shows you how tense things still were politically.
Sounds like Frances was a tough lady. But she finally agreed not to rent out Newstead after the Queen stepped in. It shows you how much power the monarchy still had, even in people's private lives.
And finally, William, the fifth Lord Byron, he turned 21 in 1743. Big moment for him. He was in control of his inheritance and his own life. What were the first things he did?
He was definitely ready for this, and just like his mother, he made a big show of supporting the Foundling Hospital, but he was mostly interested in, well, having a good time. He loved horse races and hanging out with, let's just say, the party crowd. It doesn't seem like he had big ambitions.
Yeah, his political career was pretty much a dud. He went to the House of Lords a few times, but it got boring fast. He was much more interested in going to taverns, drinking with his buddies from the Freemasons, and chasing women. It seems like he just wanted to have fun.
London had become this playground for rich people, and he was all about the party scene. It's like he had so much potential, but he wasted it. What do you think led him down that path?
It's hard to say. I mean, he looked the part of a rich landowner, but he didn't seem to care about doing anything meaningful with his life, or even managing his money well. He was all about gambling and having fun. Makes you wonder about the pressures on young men like him, you know. Maybe society pushed him in that direction.
And then, just before his 22nd birthday, something terrible happened. News came that the HMS Victory, the ship he had served on, had wrecked in a storm. No survivors. How do you think that news affected him?
It must have been a huge shock, a reminder that he had been in danger, that he could have died. His neighbor, Gertrude Saville, wrote about it in her diary. She talked about all the noblemen and gentlemen's sons who had died, the volunteers. It made war and death very real.
But even if he was upset, he seemed to find comfort in the excitement of horse racing. Meanwhile, the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745 broke out, and the Byron siblings were all over the place. Isabella and her husband were in Yorkshire, John was at sea, and Richard and George were studying. How did William react to this crisis?
Well, William joined the Duke of Kingston's regiment to fight the Jacobites. Brand describes their march north. Cold, wet, miserable. They got to Carlisle and helped lay siege to the Jacobite garrison there. It shows you how, well, aristocratic men felt like they had to serve their country, even if they weren't thrilled about it.
It sounds like the English troops were kind of disappointed, actually. They didn't see much action. The Duke of Cumberland even complained about not being able to blooded the soldiers with these villains. How did William's part in the rebellion end?
Just as his regiment was getting ready to head into the Highlands for the big battle, William, well, he kind of disappeared. He went back to London to his brother John at Isabella's house while the Battle of Culloden was happening. That battle pretty much ended the Jacobites' hopes.
He missed his chance to be a hero. While everyone else was celebrating, William was, well, he was back to his old ways. Hunting, fishing, socializing. He painted a little, collected books, hung out with the same families his parents knew. His younger brother George and George's wife Frances became his close friends. He seemed to settle for a comfortable but kind of aimless life.
And his marriage to Elizabeth, well, is falling apart. They weren't even trying to hide their affairs anymore. And it was embarrassing for everyone. Isabel even saw him with another woman at a ball. What do people think of his behavior?
It was the talk of the town. He was linked to all these women. Mrs. Chatworth, a family friend, she was really upset about the rumors that they were going to separate. Everyone knew what he was up to, and it just made him look worse.
Then came the big drama with William and his neighbor, William Chatworth. They argued about hunting rights, things got heated in a tavern, and it ended in a duel.
Yeah.
That's a turning point for sure.
A tragic one. Brand goes through the whole story, and it's clear that there's a lot of confusion about what actually happened. But Chairworth was killed, and William was in big trouble. Dueling was still happening, but it was becoming less acceptable. And with Chairworth dead, well, every detail mattered for the trial.
He said he was defending himself, but it didn't look good. If he was found guilty of murder, he could be executed. What was the public reaction?
People were not happy with William. He wasn't very popular to begin with. Some said Chairworth had started the fight, others said he was helpless, but most people wanted to see William punished.
The trial at Westminster Hall was a huge event. William showed up in mourning clothes, surrounded by guards carrying the axe of death.
Can you imagine being there?
Intense. Brand describes the whole scene.
Yeah.
The crowded hall, everyone staring at William, the lords asking him tough questions. It lasted 2 days, and William kept saying he was just defending himself. It must have been incredibly stressful. And the verdict. Not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. But because he was a peer, he didn't get any punishment. People must have been outraged. What did this do to William and the Byron family's reputation?
It definitely made people angry, and it hurt the Byron name even more. He might have escaped the death penalty, but everyone knew what he had done. It shows you how unfair the legal system was back then.
While all this was happening, William's younger brother, John Byron, he's the future admiral and the poet's grandfather, he was out at sea, having his own adventures in the Royal Navy. He was only 12 when his father died, and he had already survived a serious illness. What was he like?
John was a survivor, that's for sure. He was tough, which is a good quality to have in the Navy. He joined up, which was a natural choice for someone from his background, and he learned quickly just how hard life at sea could be. Brand talks about the strict rules, the danger of diseases, fighting, even starvation. Even the officers weren't safe.
His early years took him all over the world. Canada, Europe, all sorts of places. He even left the Navy for a bit, came back to England, found out his mom had remarried, and his sister was looking for a husband. But then war broke out with Spain, and he was back on a ship. How did those early experiences shape him?
He was promoted to midshipman at 16 and joined a squadron under Commodore George Byron. And that voyage, well, that was a story for the history books. The HMS Wager, part of Anson's expedition, wrecked off the coast of Patagonia. John wrote about it, and his account is terrifying. It's a story about survival against impossible odds. What were some of the biggest challenges they faced?
Imagine a freezing, desolate landscape, no food, and the crew falling apart. They were starving, getting sick, and tragically, some of them even killed each other out of desperation. John almost died from dysentery. It's hard to imagine what they went through.
And then they tried to reach civilization in these tiny boats, battling huge waves, losing what little food they had left. John even ate his own sealskin shoes to try to stay alive. It's a story about the limits of human endurance.
They went through months of hell, but finally, a few of them, including John, were rescued and made it back to England. They held a court-martial to find out why the Wager sank. Captain Cheap was blamed for some things, but the survivors, they didn't seem as angry at each other anymore. Maybe they had been through too much together.
John became kind of famous for surviving this ordeal, and that first summer back in England, he was already back on duty, even spying on Danish ships that were suspected of helping the Jacobites. The shipwreck hadn't scared him away from the Navy.
And he fell in love, too. He met his cousin, Sophia Trevanion. She was beautiful and elegant, and they started a relationship. It's like a new chapter in his life after all that drama at sea.
Sophia was his first cousin, which wasn't unusual for aristocratic families back then. They got married in 1748, and Sophia became part of this whole Navy social scene, moving around to different port towns.
She also hung out with artists. She was friends with the famous painter, Joshua Reynolds, who even painted John's portrait around the time they got married. The painting hints at John's travels and adventures, even if it doesn't show, the horrors of the shipwreck.
They had a bunch of daughters, but no sons at first. John kept serving in the Navy, sometimes at sea, sometimes at home with his family. How did his experiences affect him later in life?
Well, after years of people telling him to write down his story, maybe after he had some time to process everything, John finally wrote his account of the Wager shipwreck. It had been over 20 years, and people were still fascinated by it. It shows you how much that experience stayed with him.
So, even before the famous poet was born, the Byron family had already seen a lot of drama. Scandal, adventure, great successes, and terrible tragedies. It's important to understand all of this to really get the context of the poet's life and the whole complicated legacy of the House of Byron.
It's all connected, right? You can't understand the poet without understanding his family and their history.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive into the Byrons, based on Emily Brand's fantastic book. There's so much more to discover in the full text, but we hope this has given you a taste of this amazing family story.
We definitely recommend checking out The Fall of the House of Byron. If you want to learn more, you can find a link to it on Amazon in the description below.
And if you enjoyed this exploration of the Byrons' past, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on future deep dives into other fascinating historical figures and stories.
What stood out to you the most about the Byrons? What surprised you? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts.
Your comments and shares really help us keep the conversation going and introduce more people to the fascinating history of the Byron family. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.